So welcome. I'm Kathleen Merrigan, and I will moderate our session today, which I'm very excited about. So, how much does food really cost? A lot of efforts underway, most of them fairly rhetorical and evaluating the costs of food. We need to do better. So, TEEB. The economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. This is a global initiative focused on making nature's values visible. Why? Because the economic invisibility of natural wealth and degradation is influencing both the long and short-term sustainability of agriculture and food systems. So TEEB, as many of you know in the room, began back in 2009 as a wide cross-sectoral effort, but more recently we launched TEEB for Food and Agriculture. Sorry, in the United States we always say ag, but probably everyone does too. Where we're focused on valuing the ecosystem services and biodiversity across different agricultural systems where a variety of management practices are used. Our goal is to come up with a common framework for understanding the externalities of the eco-agri-food systems complex. And I'm sure Alexander will explain that term some in his presentation. But we want to look at the externalities, both positive and negative, because there's a long list on both sides of the account. We believe that we cannot manage what we do not measure. Without such an accounting, society will continue to lack an understanding of our dependence on nature. We need to do something about this. Ultimately, the TEEB for Food and Agriculture effort is asking the question, are we paying the correct price for food? Today, we release our interim report with pride and a sense of accomplishment. Many have contributed to this effort, including nearly 100 experts who came together in Brussels in September. Of course, our project director, Alexander Mueller, our leader, Salam Hussein, my colleagues here this afternoon, Dustin Miller, David, other people on the staff, many, many more. TEEB is hosted by the United Nations Environment Program, and TEEB for Food and Ag is supported by the European Commission and the Global Alliance for Food and Agriculture. We look forward to today's conversation and your input, because again, this is an interim report. This is an ongoing effort, so we look forward to your interventions this afternoon to what is going to be, over a period of time, I think a very transformative analytical effort. So it is now my great pleasure to bring up the first of our panel, our study leader, Alexander Mueller. Now, I'm going to go to his bio here. I could tell you that he's really fun to have beer with, but that's probably not my official role as moderator. So, Alexander, among many things in his long and storied career, he served as State Secretary in the Ministry for Consumer Protection, Food and Agriculture in Germany. From 2006 to 2013, he served as Assistant Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and was responsible for the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. There, this is how I got to know Alexander. I think he was my boss's boss, or maybe my boss's boss's boss, something like that. The Secretary General of the United Nations nominated him as a member of the Advisory Group on Energy and Climate Change in June 2009 to advise him on the energy-related dimensions of the climate change negotiations. From 2008 to 2011, he was chair of the United Nations System Standing Committee on Nutrition. From May 2013 until October 2014, he was senior fellow in the Cluster Global Contract for Sustainability of IASS, working on governance of sustainability with a focus on soils. By the way, it was International Day of Soils on the 5th. Happy to all. Where Alexander has been very much focused on the nexus of water, food, and energy. The European Commission appointed him as a member of the Independent Expert Commission on the junction of health, environment, and bioeconomy, foresight and implications for European research and innovation policies. So we are extremely, yes, is that true? Yeah. You're looking for more? No. Okay. So as a member of the TEEB steering committee, as a part of this effort, I think I speak for all of my colleagues that we're very lucky to have Alexander leading this effort, and I welcome him to the platform.
Thanks a lot. I'm not aware that I told you all of this stuff when we had our last beer, so it must come from somewhere else. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. We are here, as already announced, to launch an interim report. Interim report means we have done some work, but it's a long way to go. We want you to inform about the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity for food and agriculture. Sounds complicated and is really complicated. And therefore, we would like to start with presenting to you a new acronym. We all like acronyms. So if anybody talks about TEEB Ag Food, you know what we are talking about because you were here at this launch. If you go around here at the Global Landscape Forum and if you participate in some of the side events of COP21, it's surprising to see that agriculture is everywhere. Not really in the final text of the negotiations, but when it comes to sequestering carbon in the soil, you see agriculture. When it comes to the question of adaptation, you see agriculture. When it comes to the question of the threat of climate change to biodiversity, people are talking about agriculture to manage it in a different way. So it seems that there are a lot of issues related to agriculture. But the question is, one agriculture doesn't exist. We have many agricultures in the world. We have many different systems. We have many different agroecological production zones in the world. And what we want to do is we want to present, and you will hear this word very often, a framework, an agreed framework where we can value the different agricultural production systems in the world. From my perspective, it does not make sense to operate with global figures. On average, you have to take 15 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of beef. Means everything and at the same time nothing, because if you look to the different production systems in different regions of the world, sometimes you have enough water because the grass is rain-fed and irrigation is not an issue, and elsewhere you're producing milk or beef with a lot of irrigation and water is scarce. And therefore, we would like to present a framework to be used by all of you, by private sector, by science, by everybody, to do an evaluation of the interaction of different agricultural production systems with natural capital and with social capital. But we want to make it even more complex. We would like to look at the distribution of food in the world. 10 or 12% of all wheat produced in the world is traded globally. The rest is traded at local or national level. And we want to look at consumption patterns. So we want to cover the whole complex of food production, distribution, and health. And that's the reason why I said it's really complex. And I'm going to demonstrate in the next 7 to 8 minutes how complex it is. I would like to present some of the first results. And in the end, I hope after a good discussion, we can also briefly inform you what is the way forward. So interim report, a lot of work has been done, but far more has been done. And therefore, one of the key issues is the framework on the one hand, but also building up a TEEB community. If we really want to cover the different production systems, the interactions, we need a community being knowledgeable about the different systems, coming from different perspectives, and not focusing on how much tons of maize can we produce on 1 hectare of land. We have to have this different perspective, and we really want TEEB to be in the center of it. So if we go ahead, we would like to present in the end a comprehensive economic evaluation of very nice word, eco-agri-food systems complex. And we would like to demonstrate that the current environment in which farmers are operating is distorted by significant externalities, both negative and positive. And if we don't look at these externalities, we are not really capturing what agriculture is doing, where the benefits are, and where the negative externalities are. And we would like to introduce also the concept of natural and social capital. Agriculture is based on natural resources and on social systems. It's interaction of humans with the environment with the help of technology. And very often we are focusing only on technology. And therefore, the way we are going to work is very complex. If we are talking about agriculture, we have to avoid a fundamental mistake. Some people are only talking about we have to feed the world. The others are talking about agriculture is destroying biodiversity. The truth is in both pillars. And therefore, we have to look at the good and the bad, and we have to look at how can we make the system better. And never forget, and this is very important, agriculture employs 1 out of 3 people in the world. About 1.3 billion people, or 70% of the world's poor living in rural areas, are employed by agriculture. If we are talking about transformation of agriculture, we are talking about livelihoods of people, we are talking about eradication of poverty, we are talking about eradication of hunger, and we are talking about complex interactions with natural resources. Smallholder farmers, less than 2 hectares, represent over 475 million out of 570 million farms. And in some areas of the world, they produce more than 80% of the food consumed. And you all know this debate, are smallholders able to feed the world, or do we need large-scale farms, or do we need both? What we would like to provide is an answer, what can smallholders provide and what can large-scale farms provide? And you will see that the answer is very different if you do it location-specific than if you look only at global averages. And of course, we should not forget that currently the food system is producing enough kilocalories for all. My good friend Francesco will immediately tell me kilocalories is not everything. Don't forget micronutrients. But currently we are producing enough food for everybody, but still more than 800 million people are hungry. So if we look at some of the examples where agriculture is a problem, land use change, land degradation, keywords. 80% of new agricultural lands have replaced tropical forests since the 80s. Agriculture contributes to climate change and is a victim of climate change. It's a complex interaction, and if you look at the figures of agricultural expansion in the world, mainly in developing countries because of growing population, you see that this is going to grow. And of course, the famous figure, agriculture utilizes 70% of the water resources we are withdrawing from rivers and from the natural cycle. And 825 million people are hungry. So how could we do an assessment which really captures reality? And here is where our work really starts. Normally, people are looking at visible externalities and prices. We are looking at agriculture and food system. This is only capturing the agriculture part, seeds, crops, yields, and of course we have human systems and ecosystems, and there are inputs. You don't have to go through all of it, but production of agricultural produce, you need irrigation, fertilizer, pesticides, a controversial discussion about biotechnology, a lot of labor, breeding, and machinery. This is what we see as inputs. The outputs are very clear: employment, food and nutrition, fuels, fiber, and also income by agrotourism. But this is not the whole picture. And assessments so far are concentrating only on parts of what you can see here. They are looking at efficiency of systems, how much fertilizer is used to produce how much tons of maize. That's interesting, that's important, but it's forgetting a lot. And we would like to bring light to what is additionally happening. If we look at the output from agriculture to human systems, agriculture is a cultural heritage. It's the livelihood of many people. And here, by the way, we are facing a problem. Let's be frank. Do we want to monetize agricultural heritage systems? No, we don't want it. But we want to value them. We want to know how important agricultural heritage systems are for livelihoods and for culture of people. And therefore, if people are telling you this TEEB study wants to commodify nature, put a price tag on nature and sell it, that's not true. We would like to value it. And we know that there are many values where you cannot put a price tag on it. Not in dollars, not in euros, and not in any other currency. But we have to know it because cultural diversity is a very important issue, very much linked to agricultural production. Also, access to recreation, landscape. There was a famous British organization. They said, you eat your landscape. You decide with your food basket how the landscape is looking like around your cities. And therefore, this is a value we would like to capture. And of course, the whole issue about biodiversity and ecosystems. Currently, 24 billion tons of soils get lost every year by erosion. 24 billion tons of soils. We have 7 billion people, so every person is losing 3 tons of soils. If you see a little lorry rolling by here with dirt on it, that's the amount of fertile soil we are using every year. And if you put a price tag on it, and the economics of land degradation has made it, we are losing billions and billions every year. And therefore, erosion control is of high value, and it's a service provided by farmers. But they don't get money for it. Sometimes it's better to produce cheap food and cause land erosion. They are better off than if they are really looking at the interaction and what they are doing. Soil formation, nutrient cycling. The water supply for Paris relies on activities of farmers. If they do it wrong, they have a big problem here. If they do it right, farmers normally don't get money for it. Pest control, genetic diversity, pollination, moderation of extreme events, fresh water, and climate regulation. This is all incorporated in the agricultural system. But only the deep blue, these are the prices for input, and in orange, the prices for output are calculated in the system. And of course, it's not a surprise that the whole system is looking only for cheap inputs and maybe good prices for the outputs, and the rest is not really recognized. But we can go even further. If we look at health impacts, a very small issue, there is a big debate that intensive livestock production with the help of antibiotics is causing resistances. You can see the costs, but not in the food sector, not in the agriculture sector, but you can see the costs in the health sector. If you look at changing consumption patterns, they are very much related to health. And we would like to capture in the second phase of TEEB also what are the values of health. And of course, there are also positive externalities. And we can also look at the negative externalities, loss of ecosystem complexity, species reduction, soil erosion, pollution, and. And therefore, this is the whole picture. And the current agricultural system and the current markets only reflect very few visible externalities, both positive and negative. And if we want agriculture to be part of the solution, the initiatives are many. 4 pour 1000 of the French government to store carbon in the soil. 20 by 20 in Latin America, 20 million hectares to be restored by 2020. Nepal's initiative, 30 million hectares. We have to look at the whole system. And the question is, what do we know about the whole system? Do we have enough information? And can we set the right incentives? And can we make agriculture as part of the solution? This is the transformation people are talking about. It's very easy to say, we have to transform agriculture to a more sustainable production. These are bits and pieces of what has to be changed. And don't forget, 470 million people are relying on as smallholders on it, 100 million large-scale farmers, and we have to bring it together into a coherent framework. And that's the reason why the framework is so important, and I'm really happy, and I would like to thank some of you who have participated in the meeting we had in Brussels for the steps to develop this framework. If we simplify it, we can see that in the end we are talking about economy, environment, society, and human health, and this is all linked to the different production systems. So we will have to have 3 different levels of action. One is we want to recognize value. Very often we do not really identify the wide range of benefits in ecosystems and landscapes, provision and services, and. We would like to demonstrate value. People should know if the decision to be made has impacts on values as a foundation of agriculture, and we want to capture as far as possible also the values. And here we have to enter an interesting and important and difficult discussion. What is the real price of food? And how can we ensure that affordability is among the most important issues for food? We have started to do some work with feeder studies all over the world. We are not going to present all of these feeder studies. We only would like to present the work we have done on rice. But you see, we have started with a global coverage on rice, palm oil, maize production, livestock, agroforestry, and inland fisheries. But the lessons we have learned is we have to be more specific. We have to identify and analyze concrete systems and the interaction with nature and society in order to get also the differences. A kilogram of beef in one system is produced in a very different way than a kilogram of beef in another system, and the interactions with biodiversity or nature are very different. And if we want to maintain biodiversity, and we have to for many reasons, we should look what are the different impacts of the various systems. So I'm going to present very briefly what we have done to look at rice production. We have analyzed rice production in the world, one of the main stable foods for many, many people. But if you're talking about rice, it's many different systems in different parts of the world. We have analyzed the system of rice intensification, which is very different than other systems, and I would like to show you only one interesting result. We have 3 countries, Senegal on the left, the Philippines, and Cambodia. And if you look at only water consumption, you can see that water consumption in Senegal, in one system, and in deep blue, this is the conventional system, and in green, this is SRI, the Sustainable Rice Identification System, you can see that you have less costs for water, you have higher revenue, and if you look at the question of water pollution, you can also see a difference. So only here you can see that producing rice and focusing on water, rice is very different depending where it comes from. In the Philippines and in Cambodia, these are not irrigated systems, they are rain-fed, and therefore water consumption, the water people call it green water, is very different than there. And in the end, we would like to identify different systems and the interactions on the environment so that we can make informed decisions. And looking at Senegal, the society in Senegal would save about $11 million in water consumption, and there are a lot of related health and environmental costs. And at the same time, the rice producers would gain a total of 17 million through yield increases, and this is a win-win situation, a clear synergy. But you don't get it if you look at rice at global scale. Rice is rice, but if you look at the different production systems, you can see that the difference is really very, very big. And we have done this work also in different livestock production systems, in agroforestry, and we hope, because we don't want to cover the whole world, that the framework we are presenting allows all of you and all of us to analyze the interaction of agriculture with social capital and natural capital, and to make sure that we can really measure the different impacts of agriculture. And this is behind economics of ecosystems and biodiversity for food and agriculture. And you might have seen I have focused only on primary production. Distribution and health-related issues will also come. And therefore, till the end of 2017, or maybe a bit longer, depending on the money we are collecting after the session here, we can really do a very, very broad analysis, but we would like to provide a public good for all of you, for the analysis of different agricultural systems. We are counting on you. Framework is important, but as important is the community. And be assured, Now you have participated here, you are part of the community. We will come back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. I hope everyone is keeping track of the questions, the tough questions you're going to ask him when we open up the floor. It is now my pleasure to introduce Achim Steiner, who really needs no introduction in this crowd, but that's my job, the moderator, so bear with me. He is the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program and Under-Secretary General of the UN. Many previous roles very pertinent to the work here today, but let me mention two. Previously, Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, Secretary General of the World Commission on Dams. In this extraordinary time at COP21, this is a man that is in demand. It means a great deal to us that he could join us today. I welcome you, sir, to the mic for some remarks. Yeah, unless you want to sit, this seems more.
Standing is better at this time of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me begin by returning the compliment. I really did want to be here because I think the work that you, Alexander, and the network, and Pavan is here, Salman, I know you managed to get into your own event. That's good. When I came just now, he was locked out. The work that you're doing, I think, is going to be another one of those frontier-changing reports, and that is why I really wanted to join you here this afternoon. Why do I say that? Well, for many of you who are in this room, you know that for the better part of the last 50 years, the environmental outlook on the future and the agricultural food outlook on the future have been two conversations happening in two entirely different universes. In the environmental, or let me start the other way around, in the food and agriculture outlook for the future, essentially the paradigm of growth and more production has been the singular defining narrative. Underneath that, yes, is the livelihoods of farmers, is the viability of an agricultural sector, is also the notion of efficiency, and to some extent, in recent years, the discourse that links climate change, which brings us all to Paris this week, and the future of agriculture. But the narrative is essentially one of doing more of the same in order to meet an extraordinarily and exponentially growing demand. On the other side of this debate is an environmental scientific outlook on the state of our planet. Agriculture today causes 80% of deforestation, consumes over 70% of all water. It actually, in its current articulation of an economic agricultural production system, is leading to a net loss of arable land on our planet. I see Luc here, land degradation. I see Braulio here, loss of biodiversity and ecosystems. And I'm sure others in the room could speak to many other aspects, whether it is deforestation, whether it is the issue of nitrogen footprints leading all the way into the oceans with the oxygenated zones and so on and so on. So two conversations, and having worked at the interface of environment and agriculture, because I'm actually the son of a farmer, so I was born on a farm, and I've grown up in the universe of my father, who was trained as a plant geneticist and believed in the almost endless opportunity of science and technology in solving the problem of how will we feed ourselves with 10 billion people on this planet. If you look at these two conversations, then in recent years, I think we have begun to see a significant shift, but it is still only beginning to scratch the surface. Part of the work that we in UNEP began to undertake for the better part of 8-9 years now is to try and bring a mutual literacy effort into the conversation between those who speak about the world in terms of science, environmental resources, sustainability, and those who speak in terms of human and economic demands that are being put onto our resource base. The work that, and I want to recognize explicitly also the presence here of Pavan, who in many ways became the centerpiece of a school of thought and research at the time that created this TEEB framing of the question. I think the school of thought has since taken anarchic directions, which is part of the wonderful nature of human enterprise and knowledge. But to bring the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity into a shared analytical framework has not been without challenges, including from some of the environmental community who mistake that notion of economic literacy with reducing the value of nature and resources to a purely economic one. And I would just want to say again for the record that that is a red herring. And it's a discussion that, yes, is a risk in bringing economics and environment, natural resources, biodiversity together, but it is just that, a risk. So we should never allow a risk to preclude a conversation and an inquiry to take place that allows us, hopefully, to get to a higher level of intelligent decision-making, including how to manage those risks. The work on agriculture and food is also so critical because in the outlook that we would articulate today in UNEP is a very fundamental challenge. You can either look at the future and say there just isn't enough for all of us, and therefore we're going to have problems. Or you can say, well, it's a matter of redistribution because the equity dimension of our resource allocation matrix in the world today is so unfair, and it's either a matter of, good philosophy, good politics, good dictatorships, or whatever else, good ideologies. Or you can begin to look at the production function of our economies. You can begin to understand and interpret what is making an economy force farmers to practice a system of agricultural production that is actually, in many instances, destroying the very factor of production on which they depend, soil. You can also begin to look, and Pavan, you had a wonderful diagram you put up this morning in a session when we talked about fiscal policy. You can begin to comprehend that the problem of environmental sustainability in farming is in large part defined not by environmental analytics, it's actually by comprehending the systems dimension that results in an agricultural economy practicing increasingly an economy more akin to a mining operation than actually to a food and agricultural production system. And it is herein that I think lies much of the work that we in UNEP have taken forward in recent years under the heading of a transition towards a green economy. We need to understand that much of what is determinant in terms of a farmer's decision-making, a forester's decision-making, has very little to do with environmental outlook or the universe of environmental knowledge. It is determined by the economy, which is a subset of a broader societal set of choices that are enshrined in the markets, in the fiscal policies, in the land use legislation that define what our options are. And the reason why I have been so convinced that trying to bring the narrative of economic analysis together with the scientific and environmental narrative of observing what is happening on our planet is that many of the solutions to our environmental conundrums actually lie in the way that our societies are being told economic theory or the laws of economic gravity dictate certain outcomes. TEEB has been a fundamental challenge to this, beginning with the notion of valuation. And it was the original TEEB work, also under the auspices of the CBD, the German presidency of the G7 at the time, and then embedded in a broader UNEP family also that today hosts this, what I call the anchor function of that TEEB community, that we began to try and bring the first of a trilogy of analysis to the public debate, which is valuation. Without valuing in terms that society actually determines whether something is used or not used, used sustainably or not, is the ability to not lose the argument already at the first stage. Our second step was to embed this in a larger analysis of the macroeconomic policy framework within which our societies take decisions. The Green Economy report of UNEP was in many ways an attempt to try and just study how our society is trying to take that kind of perspective forward. And I think we have all been astonished by the level of innovation and ad hoc recognition of the urgency to rethink some of these policy frameworks, be they fiscal, be they sectoral, be they in terms of the true cost analysis of a certain action in our economy. And most recently, we commissioned a third piece in this trilogy, which was to understand also how financing would either be part of the solution or continue to be an amplification of the problem. Uncomfortable as it may be to some, and I acknowledge this, the reality is that in most of our economies or societies, north or south, large or small, public finance will never go beyond 20 or 30% of the economy of GDP. It is therefore absolutely essential that we understand how that financial economy, which particularly in the last 20 years has evolved almost in a parallel universe to the real economy, can be reconnected to that real economy in terms of mobilizing the financial resources which ultimately actually belong to us, not to a pension fund or not to a bank. They are the deposits, they are the pensions of people in our societies. How to reconnect that financial economy to, you can call it the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, you can call it to an environmentally sustainable path, a green economy, choose the label you wish, but essentially to make sure that we are not giving a signal with public finance that is in the end so inaudible in an economy that is 100 or 1,000 times more financially powerful that it simply gets ignored. Just to give you a sense, the deposits or the financial assets of banks alone in 2014 amounted to about $135 trillion. Now that money can either invest in the kinds of outcomes and agricultural economies that we are trying to understand, analyze, describe, envisage in a TEEB for agriculture and food, or they can simply follow the notion we need 70% increase in agricultural production and more food, even though we know today that a third of everything we produce is never even consumed. Now, how do you insert these signals into our economic decision-making from a parliament that decides sectoral policies right down to the individual who enters a shop or a weekend market and is buying produce? This is literally the spectrum of change we are talking about. I believe that the work that this particular TEEB study is now undertaking will take us literally to the frontier of the key sector that will determine whether environmental sustainability and its integral role in sustainable development, as we define them now in these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, will actually be likely to succeed, or whether we are continuing to write the kind of balance sheet that has been read for the better part of the last 100 years when we look at the relationship between agriculture and natural resources, biodiversity and ecosystems, and human food security. So again, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to join you here this afternoon. And just to say to all of you, I fully endorse Alexander's invitation. We have invested, some of you have invested. We need some more resources because this is not yet the mainstream of the conversation. It will be in 10 or 15 years' time. Can we bring it forward as part of the climate agenda, but ultimately actually of the kind of economy we need to create in which a farmer becomes a custodian and a manager of the ecological infrastructure on which we produce food? That, I think, is the way we have to reframe the agricultural economy of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Steiner. That was great. Son of a farmer and a leader of people, and clearly a generator of ideas. You put our work, put a lot of flesh on the work here and put it in context for us, so thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to move into our panelists. We have 4 panelists that I'm going to invite one at a time to provide about 5 minutes overview. And the question I would really ask them to address is, why is this framework important to you? In the context of your work, what is TEEB for Food and Ag? Why is it meaningful? So to begin, I will introduce our Goodwill Ambassador. So you know, Shakespeare, that thing, first kill all the lawyers. I always quote that because my husband's one. But, you know, there's this whole feeling about bankers, right? And, you know, what about the bankers? And how should we feel about the bankers? And our director just talked about 135 trillion in 2014 across the banks. Well, I'm about to introduce you to an incredibly innovative, thoughtful banker. Pavan Sukhdev is really the father of TEEB. That's how we refer to him unofficially. And he is really a really phenomenal person. He is the founder and author of Corporation 2020, a campaign and a book which envisions tomorrow's corporation and shows how corporations and society can and should work together to achieve common goals and build a green economy. He is also been very involved as the special advisor and head of UNEP's Green Economy Initiative up until 2011, and very engaged in their final report towards a green economy that had just been referenced. Study leader for the groundbreaking TEEB study. An international banker, Pavan spent 14 years with Deutsche Bank, and he has begun campaigning not just to promote the ideas of his most recent book, but also his new consulting collaborative, GIST, or G-I-S-T. You go by the initials of the word. The world of acronyms, hard to say. Well, you can tell us. The GIST Advisory, which is well on its way to becoming a world-class provider of environmental risk and life cycle assessment, as well as green accounting for governments and corporations. So this is a person, he's a numbers guy, he knows the banking world, and isn't it perfect that he would be the father of TEEB? Welcome.
Thank you, Kathleen, for that marvelously long and flattering description. But with, I fear, one inaccuracy. I actually prefer to see myself as the mother of TEEB rather than... It's a lot safer to be the mother in situations like this. But today, my role is to describe to you this framework that both Kathleen and Alexander and Achim also have referred to. Kathleen, you described, to quote you, a long list on both sides of the account of the positives and the negatives. And Alexander, you talked about the negatives and the positives in some detail. So my task to you is to try and put this together into how we should see and value ecosystems and biodiversity, agricultural systems, and indeed the production systems on the processing side and the distribution side of agriculture and food, and indeed the consumption of agriculture and food. All of these have contributions and sometimes costs towards society. So firstly, this idea that there should be a valuation framework itself needs to be questioned a little, you know, in a challenging way. Why do we need one? Isn't it common sense? Perhaps it is. But the problem is that that common sense, if it is that common, needs to work for applications such as a business deciding between a sustainable food product and a non-sustainable one, supposing you're a Barilla or a Unilever or someone. It needs to work for a agricultural scientist or a policymaker in some country deciding how to direct policy changes towards one form of agriculture or the other. It needs to work for potentially a policymaker looking at scenario analysis in a dynamic environment. It needs to work for the national accountant who's looking to integrate natural capital into national accounts. So when you have a framework which enables you to ask and answer the question, what should you really value and why, which does all of the above, and I've not listed all of the applications, but these are the important ones in my opinion, that's when you realize that this is not a straightforward exercise. And that's why I'm particularly grateful to Kavita, the lead author of this chapter 3 in the report that's come out, and also to a host of contributors and reviewers, and also to the 100-odd people who've looked at this and added their wisdom to this construction. It truly is a collaborative work in that sense, very much reflecting of the TEEB community's values. So this is what we've come out with as a framework, which is basically a kind of meshwork, which enables you to ask the question, okay, here are the parameters, here's the data, these are the circumstances, or this is the question being asked, and then hopefully applying the framework, you get the answers in terms of the analysis and the valuations. And we follow certain principles. So we must follow a holistic view of agriculture. It cannot be purely a production basis or purely the question of number of calories or of kilograms. It has to be, secondly, and you may question this, it has to be an anthropocentric perspective, but a holistic anthropocentric perspective. We are not here to understand whether a change in an ecosystem from what it is to what it becomes is a good thing or a bad thing for the tiger or the wolf. That's not a question that we can even think about or presume to think about. That intrinsic value of nature is not something that we are here to value or question. But we can ask the question is that if we were to follow the certain policies that we have here or different ones, what would that do overall to human well-being? That question we can ask. So therefore, we are anthropocentric, but in a holistic way. And finally, we need to look at value, and I'll talk about this for a second. We need to look at values which are value indicators, which are economic on the one hand, but also ask questions about what are other dimensions of value which we perceive which are not economic. And of course, TEEB has been saying this from the beginning, although there are certain journalists, one English one particularly comes to mind, who keep thinking that is not the case. That's because they haven't bothered to read the TEEB reports. But I can't force people. You can take a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. That's the phrase that comes to mind. And finally, when it comes to components of value, we look at the accounted value. In other words, there are elements of value that GDP reflects and that national accountants reflects. We look at those, but we also look at the unaccounted values, which Alexander enumerated. So all of this goes into this melting pot, or this sheet, which you're seeing in this diagram called framework, which enables these very different views into the eco-agri-food systems complex. Let me apologize for that, and at least say that we tried, right? We tried desperately to find a more elegant way of expressing this eco-agri-food systems complex, but we failed. However, there's still time, so if you guys come up with a new name for this, please do. We'd be very happy to receive suggestions on that. So what does the framework look like? And this is may look complicated, but the good news is that that's it, and the bad news is that this is a summary. So each of these rows and columns has a meaning and a purpose. Along the top, you see the value chain of the eco-agri-food systems of any particular form of agriculture. And remember what Alexander said, that there is not any one agriculture. There are many agricultures. So if you can imagine a whole row of sheets like this, if you like, one behind the other. So we look at the production in terms of the natural landscapes and all it provides, the infrastructure, both the power utilities and the water utilities, the manufacturing of pesticides and fertilizers and so on, farm equipment, the farm itself where food is grown. And then we move from there to the processing and distribution sides of the value chain, including the wholesale, the food and beverage industries, the retail side, and then finally on to us, consumers, as in the people who eat. The industry side of that, the household side, the hospitality, and then eventually, and very importantly, waste management. People forget that waste, if we were to, it's about 3.3 billion tons of emissions. If we were to think of waste as a country, it would be the third largest emitter, or maybe the fourth largest, since I think Indonesia just took everything over right now. And then there's the other dimension to this, which is what are the values that we are capturing? In other words, we have to capture values along this chain, but what are the values? Well, definitely must capture what is measured already by the GDP. And I'm the last person to be defending GDP, but at least it does capture profits and salaries and net interest and net rents, and these are components of value added. But what it doesn't necessarily capture, in fact doesn't capture, is many of the ecosystem services. Not all the provisioning ones, because some of them do get picked up, but definitely doesn't get hold of the other big areas of what nature provides agriculture in terms of regulation and maintenance, and what it provides us through the farm of lifestyle and heritage and so on. And then finally, some of the negatives, which we talked about earlier in terms of health, both the positives of nutrition and the negatives of potential diseases, antibiotic resistance, you name it. Then there's pollution elements, and pollution as a result of use of pesticides and use of fertilizers, sometimes causing health issues and some other times causing eutrophication and soil degradation problems. And last but not the least, why are we here? Climate. So there are huge emissions issues in this entire system of the deforestation that leads to agriculture, of the emissions of methane and carbon dioxide and other traces. So all of the above really needs to be evaluated literally on a system-by-system basis. So ladies and gentlemen, and here's my request to the TEEB community. You came to us because you had the qualities of passion and of expertise and of commitment. And trust me, we will test each one of those qualities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Now I would like to invite Guillermo Castilleja, the Chief Program Officer, Environmental Conservation, Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, one of our supporters. He oversees strategy for the Foundation's Environmental Conservation Program, which seeks to protect critical ecosystems and balance long-term conservation with sustainable use. Now, we are getting short on time. I could give a long bio for all of the rest of my panelists. They're going to have to forgive me. I will reference people to the internet and Google you all because you're so great. So come on up and give us your insights and why this framework is important to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm going to start by reading my CV, if you don't mind. I have, including publications. No, don't worry. I'm going to be short. I think that the most important thing is really the discussion that we are all looking forward to having. Just want to say that I'm here to speak on behalf of the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, which is a collaborative of about 23 foundations from North America, from Europe. And we are coming together with the notion that we can do more together than individually as we try to shift the food system of the world into a more sustainable basis, or food systems, as Alexander would like me to say. Now, why food? We are not, I would imagine, the foundations for the first green revolution back in the 60s that came together and bankrolled a lot of the research that was needed for the green revolution. We are not really foundations that are necessarily focused on agronomics or agriculture even, for that matter. But we are foundations that are really interested in some of the key issues of our day, including the environment, including food, including social equity, including health. And there is no issue in that agenda that is as central as food. So we believe that by coming together around an agenda of food, we as a group of foundations can leverage each other in the most effective way and help chart the path forward to addressing some of these issues. Now, why a collaborative? We foundations are very always proud to go and say to our grantees, you should get together and organize yourselves, and you should really coordinate amongst yourselves before you come to us. That's a very arrogant way of looking at things when we ourselves are completely disorganized and don't have a way of coming together and collaborating and showing the way forward. We are wasting a lot of resources in philanthropy by not being more effective at our own collaboration. Now, having said that, collaboration is not easy because particularly in this topic, we don't have one single goal that we are going to be pushing forward. I think Alexander and both Pavan as well stressed the importance of understanding and feeling comfortable with complexity. This is a complex issue. This is a system that is intrinsically complex. So the foundations coming together should not start by assuming that we have one single goal and it's just a question about putting money into that and getting to that goal. We need to model the system. We need to model complexity. We need to model how different issues come together and are resolved in a systemic way. This sounds easy, but for foundations that are not really used to collaborating, it is a major challenge. But unless we model systems approach, Unless we model collaboration, we're not going to be able to deal with the complexity that, that this study is proposing. So we believe that the only way to really move forward is by modeling this complexity, by modeling a systems approach, and we are very eager to do that. So we basically reject the notion that there is one silver bullet that is going to solve everything. And we're going to resist that. But in order to resist that, we need to build a scheme of this system. We need to have a sense about how the system works. And I think this is really the reason why the foundations that I represent here this evening were so keen in becoming a financial supporter of this very important study. Because this important study is giving us the framework, is giving us the way to think about these issues in a way that matches the complexity of the issue, in a way that matches the complexity of our own different foundations. Some focused on health, some others focused on the environment. So this framework is allowing us to do that. Kathleen was reminding us at the beginning of the session that we cannot manage what we cannot measure, but we cannot measure what we can't see. And so one of the wonderful things that we are finding with this scheme that Pavan just presented and that is going to be operationalized through the TEEB process is that it will allow us to unveil those values that we need to explicitly address and have the trade-offs to find solutions that are not prescribed by this system. We're going to have to find them ourselves. But we need that system, that framework to allow us to do that and to really understand the trade-offs and to really, in that context, we as foundations, who we believe have an important role in moving this agenda forward, have a path to follow in a way that is supportive of what civil society, governments, and businesses are trying to do, with the responsibility that we're not going to come here arrogantly with one solution that we want to impose to everybody. We want to be able to do it in a way that matches the complexity of the task. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd next like to invite up Francesco Branca, Director of the Department of Nutrition and for Health and Development in the World Health Organization. If you're in the United States these days, it's all about nutrition, dietary guidance, and sustainability. I just stay away from my country right now. It's hot politics. But I thank you for sharing your views on why what we're doing here is important.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's indeed a very, very delicate discussion, but very important discussion. And I'm really thankful to UNEP for having convened the meeting, convened the study, to Alexander for having led this. And I'd like to start from our point of view, which is the point of view of health. And in the nutrition arena, we are realizing the importance of nutrition for the protection of health, for the development, to have really good human resources for the future, to protect our children. 45% of the deaths of children under 5 are accounted for by undernutrition. But at the same time, we have really multiple forms of malnutrition. We have about 2 billion people who are vitamin and mineral deficient. We have at least 600 million people who are obese in the world. And these forms of malnutrition are actually coexistent and linked to one another. And we should think of all of them comprehensively together. Last year, the WHO and FAO convened an international conference of nutrition to address this challenge. And there was general agreement that the food system is dysfunctional. So the food system is not able to really improve nutrition. It's a paradox, really. The food system doesn't seem to be designed to address global malnutrition. It has different purposes. And we then learn from the environmental community that the food system is indeed responsible for affecting the planet. So the food system doesn't seem to be caring about the health of people and the health of the planet. Something fundamentally wrong here. And so we need to act there. And we're really pleased to be discussing with you. Somehow in the nutrition sphere, we realize that we need to work intersectorally. We need to work to build alliances, because otherwise all this very useful and important recommendation we made for policies cannot be implemented. These are not led by health. The food system is not led by health. It's led by other sectors. So here we are to have this dialogue and to have this discussion. The Sustainable Development Goals made a very important point, and you basically see that nutrition and health is underlying many of the goals. It's not only about the health goal number 3. Certainly it's about the second goal. And the second goal, end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture, talks about safe nutrition and sufficient food all year round. So I think, first of all, we need to set that concept right. What is safe and nutritious food? You heard already, it's not about the calories. And I think this is a very important contribution of the TEEB report. It already acknowledges it's not only about the energy, it's about different nutrients. And if we want to have food security, we have to redefine the concept of food security, not only in terms of energy, but in terms of the comprehensive nutrient needs of all populations at all stages of the life course. And then the target 2.2 is end all forms of malnutrition. So really we need to see how the food system could be shaped, and I really like the approach of the TEEB to look at the whole value chain, how it could be shaped from production to consumption, from farm to fork, to really cater all these needs. It's difficult to look at the different elements with a single metrics. I think very few assessments look at the natural capital, the human capital, the physical capital, the societal capital, and in a holistic and integrated way. So I think the TEEB courageously does this, and we like the importance of understanding the invisible, to look at the externalities on health. We really like the value chain approach, and we'll be very happy to contribute to look at this analysis, certainly to make some of those elements visible, because if we start having a common narrative and a common metrics, then it would be much more effective and much easier to give legs to our proclaims and to see really a new food system happening within our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Branca. Last on our panel, Gustavo Junqueira. Kinda close. I'm terrible with names. Gustavo is the 25th and current president of SRB, Brazil's most respected farmers association, and he also runs a family-owned farming operation. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for all of you being here today. I started the afternoon making a huge mistake. I've asked for my colleagues here to be the last one to speak, and of course that was not appropriate with so many intelligent and smart positions that I just heard. But I want to speak this afternoon with you in two categories. One, as a farmer. I mean, my family has been in the farming business since the 1700s, and we have been doing that in Brazil. So we have seen many different ways of farming, many different, peer pressure, many changes that we have to experience. Until the last, I would say, 30 years ago, Brazil was trying to import, to copy everything that was done in Europe or in North America. And of course, that was not giving the country or the farmers the benefit of doing agriculture in Brazil. That was mostly a very inefficient way of doing that. And of course, a lot of deforestation happened through that time. But now we kind of could grasp that we are a major powerhouse, both on the agriculture production as well as in terms of environmental and natural capital. Brazil will, one way or the other, play a very important role in these two important parts of the human life. And going back to the question, I mean, why do we need a framework? We need a framework because being very competitive in terms of food production, in terms of agriculture, as well as one of the largest resources of nature intact in the world, we need that framework to understand how we're going to play that market, how we're going to play on our advantage as well as on everyone else's advantage. Today, Brazil has about 65% of all its territory protected. I mean, most of the view that you have from Brazil, and especially from Brazilian agriculture, is that we are a major devastator of all the natural resources that the world still has intact. But that's not true. We have just approved a forest code that is very restrict. I mean, it's under implementation. And just to give you one example of how restrict it is and how much investment we are doing both in terms of capital and as well as reorganizing the country. I mean, one farmer in Brazil, regardless of the size of their property, is now obliged to have from 20%, if it's in the south of the country, to up to 80% of their property protected, even if now it's under soybean production or under sugarcane or cattle raising. They will have to fence that area and protect it. So that will cost a lot of money. I mean, the early estimates is that will cost around 100 to 150 billion US dollars. And I'm not even counting with the logistics of it. I mean, it's basically we're going to rebuild the country, as difficult as it was rebuilding Europe after the Second World War. We don't have seeds. We don't know where to plant. We don't know how much area we're going to have to plant in the first year. We don't know who's going to plant, who's going to maintain that new area of expertise, and we don't have a market for that. And that's the point I think the framework's very important. If we continue to discuss climate issues and commerce issues in different forums, I'm sure we're not going to get to the objective that TEEB is looking for. That is really to find a new world order, especially if we don't take the health issues into consideration. So what we need now is really a framework to define where and how we're going to rebuild the planet. Because without it, if we're just pushing the problem to the other community, we're certainly not going to find a solution that will give us a better life than we have it today. And of course, that will cost a lot of time. I think TEEB is doing a great job just presenting what we think and what we believe it's a way to analyze things. But it's not final. Certainly, it's not the only way to view it. So your participation is critical to that process. And I think that we are basically finding and trying to find a way to change it. And I mean, my last comment would be that we need to, just giving you a view on how I think that, I think the financing of farmers, the way we market, we price things, that is the initial point where we're going to change things. And then we go to the subsidies and we go how everything is organized. And Brazil, my organization has been established in 1919, so it's almost 100 years. And as I said in the beginning, we have seen a lot of things. And we are open to sit down with farmers throughout the country and show them that the changes will have an impact, but that impact is taken care and will have and will be addressed by everyone in a combined way, in a combined effort. So I think the framework is essential for us to begin that discussion and, of course, to find a solution. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is now the time for your interventions, your questions for our esteemed panel. I guess we have a mic back there, but we also have mics here, and maybe you can just speak up really loudly, and we won't have to roam. I'm seeing all kinds of hands. This lady right here, yes. Could you stand up and
talk very loudly?
Very loudly.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm not sure if this is working. Is it working?
It is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Absolutely brilliant, and congratulations. What a fantastic effort. I'm very excited to see this. Partly because I work in supply chains and I work with raw materials, so this is going to be really, really helpful for me as well in my work. But one of the things that really hit me today, having just come from the World Climate Summit, which is the business meeting on the other side of town, picking up on a couple of different points that you made about this literacy, these frameworks and these different narratives. There was no discussion, at least in the panels that I was in, on agriculture. It was all about clean tech and invest. Now, there could have been a discussion, it was about clean tech and investment in clean tech and carbon and efficiency and so on. So it is absolutely essential that we can have a framework and where we can have a discussion about solutions around this really important issue. One point, so I just wanted to make one point. I know it's complex, but at the risk of adding complexity, I think that the aspects of fiber and leather, and I come from an apparel supply chains, I think that's really important. I know it's part of agriculture, but a lot of these farming systems do produce for these different sectors, and that's important when you're going to talk to business, because my business will listen when you talk about their raw materials. So that's sort of an important way of framing it. But my question to you, because you're brilliant and you have a lot of ideas, is a little bit more on the implementation and operationalization of this. How are we going to get the investment and the focus on moving from unsustainable high-impact production systems to sustainable low-impact production systems? There's a limit to how much individual companies can do. And there is a hurdle to get over, whether it's subsidies, incentives, there is a supply chain cost. And so how are we going to do that? And where are we going to have those discussions together? Thank you.
Microphone's there.
Does someone on my panel want to address that? I'm just going to have one of you guys answer that. Okay. I know everyone would have a different take on it, but I want to get more of the audience in. Yeah. So if you don't mind.
So thank you, Helen, for that straightforward question. So easy. So what you're really asking is, what is our theory of change? And I think in total fairness, even though we've all worked quite hard right now, we are merely working towards our theory of change with the recognition that step one has to be creating a unified valuation framework, and maybe together with step one, testing it with a few particular sectors. Because once we have a consensus around how do we evaluate an eco-agri-food system compared to another, once we have consensus around that, only then can we realistically go to the policymaker or realistically go to the next business leader and say, look, support us, this makes sense, or make decisions along this framework. I think that's step one. But I think after that will come a whole slew of initiatives to do with policy transformation, with technology transformation, with business transformation. And those will be the steps 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And I think that's really what is the area that our main reports will explore. I don't want to steer into an area which I know Alexander will comment on, in terms of what will be some of the discourse and discussion and exploration that will take place in our main reports on policy, on business, and on consumption. So that's really as much as I can say now.
Well, thanks, Kathleen, for giving me the floor. My name is Jess. I'm with the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, and it's Development Cooperation Day, so I would like to make a brief comment from the point of view of the 2030 Agenda. And I think there's several studies who show that sort of the overall demand that the SDGs place on our environment under business as usual scenarios is way too high. It will sort of run the risk of turning the SDGs unsustainable. So I very much see the value of the eco-agri-food systems perspective as contributing to heuristic or holistic perspective on the matter. So accepting your invitation, Achim and Alexander, I would encourage us to explore whether we shouldn't make use of the outcomes of the study as part of the multi-actor review framework that's being called for on the 2030 Agenda, not least to address the risks that are sometimes attached to these evaluation techniques. Thanks.
Does anyone want to comment that, or just?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Well, that's easy.
Okay. Perhaps Alexander will answer too.
Thank you. My name is Albrecht Glatzle. I'm a farmer in Paraguay, and as such I'm a little bit concerned, having seen CO2 only on the negative side of the balance. Actually, CO2 is the most important nutrient of life, as it is the only carbon source for all organic matter. And a couple of months ago, there was a publication by Indur Goklani, who estimated the fertilization value of man-made CO2 to $140 billion annually on a global level, of course. Yeah. Okay, shouldn't you consider it at both sides, at least, of your evaluation? Thank you.
Dr. Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Seger. I'm the head of an international law research institute. It's based in Cambridge and Montreal, Nairobi and Santiago. And I'm also the chair of the Climate Law and Governance Day, which just was inaugurated this week. And my question won't surprise Achim or Pavan, but I'd really like to give a chance to go upstream just a little bit further. Financing is needed to make this shift. It's actually even needed just to fund the kind of studies and systems approaches that you are now finally, as brilliant people that you are, putting in front of us and allowing us to participate in the co-evolution and development of. I wanted to know, and this is from the perspective of having just done a study that looks at the financing rules of a set of different funds comparatively. I'd like to know what law and governance changes could actually be put in place at the very beginning of this systems change that would actually be able to ensure that some of that financing is made available. And I mean for work like this, not just the shift in the systems that is needed down the line, because without this information, that shift could take us anywhere. Thank you. She thought I'd be longer than I was.
Yeah, actually I want to go in the same direction like Helen did. My name is Marcus, I'm from Organics International. And you emphasized actually investment into the value chain. But I feel there is a step before that. There is a step in investment into community. You said it, there is a framework and community. I appreciate that very much. And I think there has to be a big alliance in order to make the political willingness for it. We see here in Paris very much how political willingness is important. There are so many things we know which we can't do the step because of that lack. So maybe a few thoughts how to create this political power.
Thank you. Am I on? Yeah? Mike Lesnick with the Merrigan Institute. First of all, just brilliant and much needed. I can't help listening. It made me think about the early days in the formation of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And maybe I'm off. But in some ways, my question is the flip side, perhaps, of the post-2030, in that we're lucky enough to work with Walt Reed, who was the director. And I remember the early days looking at within systems and between systems, a lot of complexity. And I'm wondering, are there ways of either drawing upon that, or is this a naive question? But it seems, as you said, resources are needed and ways of dealing with this kind of complexity, because I think it will be used. Thank you.
Cindy Morris, I'm a researcher at INRA here in France, and I wanted to say thank you to all of you, but in listening to Francesco Branca's talk, I felt extremely relieved that finally we're going to go beyond kilocalories in thinking about human health. So, but kilocalories, you can understand the utility of them in modeling and predicting food security because yield translates directly into kilocalories, protein and carbohydrates versus lipids. So what would that mean for what we need to be able to measure for crops at harvest time? What do we measure, and how do we measure the complex proteins, B12, et cetera? So that's what I'd like to know, because that's really important.
Kathleen, you have one here.
In the back corner, right?
Thanks very much. Bill Herditch from Sydney, Australia. I'm just interested in the higher level. This may be a later study, but in Australia we've got 2 major supermarket chains, only 2. And the fight is always to get the lowest price to the consumer. Our competition regulators do not even think about upstream. They don't even think about externalities. So when and how will you engage with that dimension of this problem? The remit of the competition regulator is to get the lowest price to the consumer, basically, actual price. So that's a big issue. It's probably one of the biggest issues that we're going to have to tackle.
Patrick Binns. I'm a consultant in Seattle, Washington, and I had the privilege of working with Hans Herren in writing the agriculture chapter of the Green Economy. I applaud you all for the holistic work that you're starting. One thing that struck me when Alexander was showing the input model is I think you should consider the inputs of the metadata of agricultural production. Our technologies, both in terms of sensing and responding to what we know, is substantially on a very fast trajectory, and it's going to affect all of the things we're able to do with inputs. And I'd like to see if there's a way you could get your arms around that, whether it's the cost, performance, availability of soil quality testing, weather data, yield variability, you know, that's already here in industrial agriculture, and where we could go to look at the soft side of inputs would be a very significant addition to the physical hard components of inputs that you're analyzing now.
Yeah. Question, comment over here.
It's not a question, it's a comment. First of all, thank you for an excellent report. But do you know the smallest and perfect sustainable food system which exists? It's breastfeeding. I'm from WHO, so I want to mention it. And how do you value it? It's environmentally friendly, it respects rights, and I just want to draw attention to the system of breastfeeding.
Thank you. Now I'm looking for that back section, guys. Where's the question from the back section? I'm always suspicious of the students of mine that get in the back row. They know I'm coming to get them. Anything here? Comments, questions? All right, they've been called out, though. I know there are others. Who else has a comment or a question they want to share?
I wanted to make a comment about the objective that has been set for establishing a common methodology against which to assess externalities. I think this is a very exciting and important objective, not least because, as we know, so far there is quite a landscape of different methodology assessment tools being used by those who have been or are already in this territory. So convergence on methodologies is very important. And in that connection, I wanted to just suggest that we need to listen to what's out there and think about other convergences. For instance, there is a vacuum at the moment, it seems to me, in relation to how we assess the sustainability of different farming and food systems. I've been very involved with organic certification, and I think it's going to have to give way in a harmonious way to a new way of assessing agricultural sustainability. And I think the metrics we use for the assessment of agriculture and food system sustainability are a kind of cousin of what we will need for the assessment tool that we end up with for assessing agriculture and food systems externalities. And there is another body of work going on in the financial community with risk assessment. And in exactly the same way, organizations like SASB, which is based in San Francisco, they are establishing metrics for risk assessment for investors who want to invest in sustainable food business. So we need to have a convergence between not only within the world of externalities assessment, but also in parallel initiatives so that the metrics involved in each case can talk to each other.
Hal Hamilton, Sustainable Food Lab. I think the holistic thinking that's gone into this interim report is already a contribution, but I think the framework first, and we'll get a theory of change as we go. There's a danger in inventing a new hammer without consulting the carpenters. And my experiences with the private sector and the kinds of commitments that are being made this week to zero net emissions and those sorts of things from multinational corporations, and similar commitments to zero deforestation, all that sort of thing. Those are huge opportunities to try to insert the right kind of metrics and partnerships between private sector and public sector. Huge opportunities. So please don't keep this in academia.
So I'm going to have Hal's charge there be the last word from the crowd. I think it's very good, and it actually dovetails very much into what those of us involved with TEEB really want, is input from all of you as we carry on. And so I'd like to invite Alexander to the mic to just give us a brief understanding of where are we going from here. Today is a big day for us, release of this interim report, but our work has hardly begun. As everyone said today, this is very, very complex analytical journey that we're on. We're going to need all the carpenters to help. Alexander, what's next?
Thanks a lot for all these questions, proposals, and the references to other work. I would like to bring it down to 3 very brief conclusions. The first is, as you have seen, we have done only the first step now. And it's a journey of 10,000 miles, and we know the first step is the most important, but then the second most important is the second step. So what we are going to do is we are going to commission some new research where we would like to see if we have learned the right lessons. We have to look at mixed systems. Until now, we have looked more or less at production of commodities, and we want to look into mixed systems because the first lessons are you have a lot, you cannot really capture the full values of agricultural production if you look at commodities only. So this will be the new research we have to commission. At the same time, we also have to look at work already done. And the world is full of very good work we can use. Our colleagues and friends from WHO have done a lot of work on what are the health impacts of palm oil consumption, for example. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to link it with our work of what is the interaction of different palm oil production systems with social and natural capital, and we can link it to their work. The challenge is not to make the framework we have developed not recognizable again, but we have to see how we can put things together. So this will be the next steps. We have to also look back to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and the lessons learned and to try to link it to the community. So taking into account work done elsewhere. And we will also come to identification of gaps. We will identify a lot of gaps where we'll ask the research community, hey guys, can you contribute to populate the framework? So therefore, population of the framework is the next steps, and I think we will have 3 sources: new research, looking at work already done, and interaction with the carpenters and the researchers on what do we need to know and where are the gaps. This is my item number 1. My item number 2 is, many of you made reference to the political economy of the food system and also to governance. What we can see, especially here at COP21, is that we are entering a new phase of global governance. SDGs and what will come out of these negotiations will be very, very different than the legally binding agreements we had in the past, Kyoto Protocol. And therefore, our study also has to contribute to the changing political environment, to the changing governance structure we currently see with regard to climate change and natural resources. The idea of linking TEEB to the review processes of the SDGs, I really like it, because there we can focus on natural resources, we can focus on review processes of the SDGs, and we can present that SDGs can only be fully implemented and understood if we do it in a cross-cutting way. What I currently see, and I have worked in the UN system, currently the UN organizations and a lot of civil society organizations are slicing the SDGs and say 17.3 A is mine and I'm going to work on it. But don't touch it, yours is 17.3 B. And therefore, if we don't connect the dots, we will not be able to deal with complex issues. And maybe our framework could also contribute to this review process and to a learning process. I strongly believe that all of us, we have to learn. What we are doing is knowledge intensive, and knowledge is not there in a box so that we can use it. We have to generate it, we have to connect the dots, and we have to bring it up to different other issues. The most important will be to develop what Pavan has called the theory of change. If we cannot manage financial flows, investments in a way that they contribute to achieve multiple objectives, we will fail. If we talk about climate change and we only want to reduce CO2 and do not talk about development, it's not going to work. If we want to protect natural resources without having in mind that the population is growing, it's not going to work. So in the end, not tomorrow morning, in the end we will have to develop not only a theory of change, but we also have to assemble drivers of change, companies and people who are willing to drive the change in order to make investments in a way that we can achieve multiple objectives. And this means linking development and environment. This means coming back what has been decided in Rio 1992, environment for development, development for environment. So we have to bring together the different constituencies. This will also mean to understand a lot of different languages. That's the real challenge, because people are talking about the same thing in different languages without understanding it. And if we can use the work we are doing in bringing communities together and highlighting the need for investments to achieve multiple objectives and to get a return on investment, we will not make it. And therefore we have the 3 steps. First, populate the framework with the issues I've mentioned. Second, try to understand how we can contribute to the changing political economy and to the changing governance structure at global and at national level. And third, trying to guide investments to achieve multiple objectives and not to increase yields and to destroy biodiversity. We have to do it in the same way. We have to produce more food. We have to consider nutrition as an outcome. We have to protect the environment, but in the end, it has to be done in a holistic way. It's a very short program between now and the end of 2017 or beginning of 2018. But as we have made already very clear, we will come back to you because we need the community to populate the framework and the community to drive change. Thank you very much.
I know we're at time, but I just want to go down my panel very quickly and give each panelist a last word, because you have all been so attentive and high energy. I know you want to hear from them. Mr. Ambassador, what do you have to say? What's the final word from you?
You know, I'm around for another 15 minutes to answer questions. But just a heartfelt thank you for all the effort that you've all put in, all the advice that you've given. Completely agree with the comment that we don't want to have a hammer without having consulted carpenters. Quietly, we actually have. And now they will soon be visible, I think. But this is a community effort, and we need one consensus framework. We can't have many.
Yes, part of the theory of change, I think, is transparency. Don't ever underestimate the power of transparency. And I think that this framework is going to help us do that.
I believe the answer to many questions here is we have to engage the final consumer. I mean, decisions on buying food and buying, deciding quotas for exports are today based on government decisions. And now we have to move to the final consumer, to them to make the decision. And then we're going to have farmers anywhere in the world. The market will take care of producing sustainable food, and the framework will help them to find that system. So I think the final consumer is the answer to the questions here.
Thank you. We need to measure dietary adequacy. We have too much sugars, too much fats. We don't have enough fruit and vegetables. We have undersupply of certain vitamins and minerals, and we have maldistribution of animal source food. So we need to understand what gets produced. And what gets produced is not random. It's determined by public policies. It's determined by subsidies. It's determined by investment in research and infrastructure. So we need more public policies, and we need more policy coherence to make this happen.
I know that you didn't say too much wine, so I know that's the absolute last word goes to our director.
I thought you were going to say, can you serve some wine? I just want to go back to the analogy of the carpenter, because I thought when you, or rather of the